Let's be honest, Microsoft Flight Simulator is one of the most incredible pieces of software ever made. I know, you're laughing, but I do think it's pretty amazing software, although there is still a lot to improve. But for new players, it's maybe even more frustrating, right? Think of all the menus, think of the performance, which is not entirely optimal, but also the in-game tutorials, which are sometimes inadequate. Many new users are quitting before their first flight because they simply can't get their controls, for example, to work. I've spent the last week digging through hundreds of forum posts, helping guides and user complaints to find the 10 tips that actually solve the biggest problems. We're going to take you from frustrated to flying in the next 25 minutes. This is what I wish I knew before starting Flight Simulator 2024. So tip number 1, this is by far the most important one if you ask me, because if you can't control the aircraft, playing Flight Simulator isn't that nice. If you're unlucky, you can spend 50 minutes on fixing your controls, especially if you're using a new control, a new joystick, for example the Thrustmaster, and felt was twitchy and absolutely awful. And then you're not the only one, because a lot of users are reporting this, and based on the videos I created on how to configure joysticks, I can see that I would say those are pretty popular videos. So thanks for watching them, and if you're searching for help, then definitely watch those videos. So, is there an easy fix for those controls? Well, of course, it requires you some time, but there are 2 things which I want you to know. And that's that you need to configure your dead zones and your sensitivity curves. Now, where to find them? Well, if you go to the options, you can go to your controls. There you will find all your controls. In my case, the mouse, the keyboard, and the velocity 1 and number 2. Below that, you see the different controller profiles with locks, which means those are the default ones. If you want to create a new one, make sure that you click the gear icon and then say create. You can also select duplicate, that will make simply a copy of this profile, and then you can adjust it to your needs. So create, prompt you for the name, you can apply the name and then say okay, and then you've created a profile. But what about those other 2 things which I talked about, the dead zones and the sensitivity curve? Well, those can be changed by pressing the gear and then say hardware settings. So inside this new screen you will find the axes, and those are the axes which are connected to your controllers, such as the x-axis for rolling and y-axis for pitching. Now there's one important thing, because we first need to change the dead zone, because the dead zone is something which will likely help you a bit and avoid catastrophic problems when your plane drifts, even when you're not touching the stick. That's also called the natural jitter of your hardware. So what you need to do is select the axis, and then you will find the dead zone. And inside the dead zone you can change it, and you can change the value from 0 to maximum of 1. Not sure why it's 1 and that I would say full, but what I do recommend you is to change it to, I would say, a small deviation, in this case 0.03, which stands for 3% roughly. And do the same thing for your y-axis, right? Change it to that same value. Once you're happy with that, you can say keep it, or you can change it. In some cases what you will see is that the deviation is a little bit more, so you might need to make more adjustments to this. In addition to that, you see the sensitivity plus and minus, and those are the sensitivity numbers which you also need to change. The reason for this is if you don't change it, then you will likely have not a very smooth flight. The default is 0%, which means it's a linear curve, meaning a small stick movement makes it a small jerky in-game movement. While you might want to have, I would say, a little bit of softer movement. Well, if you want to do that, you need to change these values. You need to change the values to minus 30%. So you need to drag it a little bit to the left until you're at that 0.030. Here we go. Always hard, right? And do the same thing for the minus. And then repeat that process for the other one. It's always hard to change it. Change it also to the y-axis, right? Make those adjustments and then your flight will become much easier with your joystick. Now there's one important thing for Xbox controllers. Controller users. This menu is hidden by default. If you want to do it, you need... Now there's one important thing for Xbox controllers. This menu is hidden. So you first need to start a flight, then press the RB key and the left stick click to enter the cursor mode. Move the cursor to the top of the screen, click the controller icon, and then you can go to the hardware settings and then you will find these sliders which I just explained to you. It's easy, but I would say sometimes hard to find, but it will definitely help you. Now that your axes are smooth, you're faced with a list of hundreds of possible key bindings. It's overwhelming, you don't need them all. In fact, you only need a handful to get started. The biggest mistake new players make is muscling the controls for the entire flight. They're constantly, let's say, fighting the stick, trying to hold the altitude. This is because you haven't bound or don't understand trim. And that's, let's say, nothing bad, right? I also face that issue and I must admit I'm still sometimes facing that issue. So what you need to do in that case is go again to that control settings menu, right? Which we also looked at. But now we're gonna look at a different part of the control settings. In this case, I want to change the yoke, right? Because that's where I want to change the elevator settings. The most easiest way is by using the search box and then type elevator. If you search elevator, you will see this trim down and trim up, and those are the keys which you need to adjust, because these two keys, I should say, will be your friends, because you can adjust it to trim. So if you set the elevator trim nose up, which is this one, which I highlight, this is the cruise control for your altitude. It's the most important bind you'll make. It lets you fly level hands-free. This mostly is assigned to the head switch up, but it's up to you. Then the next one is the elevator trim nose down, the other half of your cruise control, right? And in that case, the head switch down is something which you could use. Besides this, there are some other options or some other important things. What about the flaps, for example? So again, you remove this, you search for flaps and you'll find the flaps. The most important ones are the increase and decrease of the flaps. You can assign one or multiple keys, right? In this case, button number 4 is assigned, and I can change I can assign other buttons to it, and this will either increase the flaps or decrease the flaps. So increasing flaps, like this one, it adds lift for takeoff and drag for landing, right? You cannot land without these in most cases. I do recommend you to choose 2 different buttons, unless you've got a leveler which you want to use, because in that case you need to use the flaps axis. Then the other one is of course to decrease the flaps, and that's also really important, right? You also need this one. So make sure that you configure both of them before starting the flight. Then of course we've got the other thing, right? The landing gear. Not applicable to all aircrafts, but for some of them it is important. You've got the toggle landing gear button. This single button allows you to either, say, do gears up or do gears down, and if you don't have it, well, you're having an issue. Again, it's not applicable to all the aircrafts, but it still is important. Then, of course, after this, we've got the brakes. The brakes are also super important. I'm not talking about the toggle the barking brakes, but I'm talking about the brakes. Depending on your needs and depending on your joystick, you might assign one button to control both the left and right brake, or you can define different ones for these. In this case, you can assign 2 different buttons to individually control the left and the right brake. Is it everything? No, there's one other button or function which I definitely recommend you to change or to configure at least, and that's the toggle cockpit mode. The toggle cockpit mode is a little bit hard to find, because I'm also seeing that I now searched for incorrectly. So in that case I will search for external, and there you have an option where you can switch between internal and external. And this is really important. It's called cockpit external view mode. This one allows you to switch between the cockpit mode and the external mode. Really easy, simply using one button, of course, if you want to do that. So time for tip number 3. Everybody's complaining about the performance in Flight Simulator 2024, so you as the first time player might also experience some things. Even if you've got a 4070, 4080 or 4090 GPU from Nvidia. This is currently the biggest complaint from all simmers. The community even has discovered a major bug in the VRAM usage, which is the video RAM, and that causes some serious impact on the performance. I'm gonna show you some settings which you might want to adjust, but be aware that in your situation it might be a little bit different. So if you go to the options, you will go to the general and graphics. That's the default menu which you end up, and then you expand the global rendering quality. As you can see, I also set it to custom because I made some changes. In this case, a lot of these things are set to ultra. The first thing if you experience performance issues is decrease these items to high, and then start with a few of them to see how it works, if it improves before you're changing everything to high. It's definitely not needed to change everything to high, because it might be that you simply change a few things and already improves a lot. Besides that, there's that other one. That's that nice option. If you get the Nvidia card, then make sure that you're using one of these options, right? The anti-aliasing method, DLSS or FSR, and set it to be quality. So make sure that this setting is set to quality, because you want to have a high quality. At least that's what I assume. Because if you set it to performance, if you want to get the max performance, then you will face some cockpit look blurry. In addition to that, there's one other setting. It's called the terrain level of detail. For that one we need to go down a bit. Here you see it. And this is your main CPU heavy setting. The base setting is 100, and if your performance is good, you can slowly raise it to 140 or maybe 200, but stop as soon as you see stutters. In my case it's set to 400, which is a little bit too high, and I also experience stutters when I'm, for example, at really busy airports. So keep this in mind that you might want to change this. Yes, it's frustrating that the sim launched with these issues, but I do think that the Sobo has learned from it. Oh, speed. You probably ask yourself, what should be my roadmap? If you're new to flight simming, then your starting point should be the career mode. This mode now contains the flight school, and it's the intended starting point. Your first goal should be to complete, for example, the private pilot license, also known as the PPL lessons. Those lessons will help you getting understanding the basics like takeoff, landings, taxiing, and those are great for learning the feel of the controls and the basic procedures of a flight. You'll fly through blue rectangles and get a grade, but you need to know what this trading doesn't do. The community consensus is that the built-in tutorials are sometimes inadequate. They provide no meaningful feedback of what you're doing wrong, and more importantly, they won't explain you why. They can even build bad habits, like teaching you to turn without using your rudder. So my advice is, absolutely do these lessons to learn the motor skills, but use the rest of this video to learn the knowledge the game leaves out. Whether you're in an old Cessna with steam gouges or a new one with a glass cockpit, the panel is intimidating. But all you need to know are the big six, the 6 core instruments that are on every airplane. The airspeed indicator, the altitude indicator, the altimeter, the turn coordinator, the heading indicator, and the vertical speed indicator. These are the 6 most important settings. And luckily they're also available in the glass cockpit, but those are just the digital versions of those 6 analog dials. Here's what they are and what they simply are meaning. Right, the airspeed indicator simply means how fast am I flying through the air. The attitude indicator, which way is up. right? Shows your pitch and your bank. The altimeter, how high am I above the sea level? Then we've got the turn coordinator, and am I turning? Is it a clean coordinated turn? The heading indicator, which compass direction am I pointing to? For example, 90 degrees for east. And the vertical indicator, am I climbing or descending right now? You'll get bored of just flying around. You want to fly from point to point. In Flight Simulator 2024 there are multiple ways. One of them is to use the web-based flight planner, but it might be, say, a little bit complicated for beginners. So I would recommend to use the world map, and the world map can be accessed by pressing the free flight option, and there you'll be able to set your departure and arrival. The departure can be entered by just starting to type the ICAO code, so KJFK for John F. Kennedy Airport, and then it will zoom into that location where you're departing from. But there's also another way. For example, if I want to land on this airport, I just can click on it and set it as arrival. But this is the VFR flight. How do I know that? Well, based on some knowledge, but also when you would go to your flight map by pressing the EFB and then going to this nice option, the flight details, you can see that the flight rules are set to VFR. You can of course also set it to IFR, but in that case different rules will apply. So make sure that you set your flight rules to VFR to enjoy your flight. That's it, right? Not really difficult, but simply something which you need to keep in mind. So you're sitting in a cold and dark cockpit for the first time. You want to be realistic and use the checklist. But where is it? In Flight Simulator 2024 the old checklist panel is gone, right? It's not here on the top anymore, and you need to find where it is. Well, the simple answer is press the tab key. This opens the new electronic flight bag. As you can see, it's currently set to a flight plan, but this is also where you can find the checklist. The checklist can be found on the aircraft, and there you will find a checklist for each individual aircraft which you own. Based on this, you can now go to the checklist and you can mark off those items which you completed. Because there's one bad thing. The autocomplete or copilot feature for Flight Simulator 2022, where it marked all the things as completed, is now completely gone. So you will need to move them one by one. But there's also a cheat code. If you don't want to follow the full checklist and you still want to, say, get started, then you can always press the Ctrl and the E from Echo key. This moves everything, and as you can see while pressing it, it will now start my aircraft automatically. Simply one shortcut, but it will save a lot of time. Even if you don't want to wait for it, or if you don't want to go to the full checklist, this could be an easy option for you. Autopilot is the biggest obstacle for many new players. It's intimidating and it's not a smart system. You've probably done this. You got in the air, then you press the AP button, the autopilot button, and your plane violently bangs and dives for the water. It's not a bug, it simply is a misunderstanding of how autopilot works. Because when you're pressing the autopilot button, the default mode is roll hold and pitch hold. It only holds the exact altitude you were in when you pressed it, and if you're in a slight untrimmed bank like I'm currently in, the autopilot perfectly holds that bank right into the ground. Here is the 3-button process to use it correctly. We're going into this and I will show you how to use the heading hold and the altitude hold mode. So we're currently flying, as you can see the autopilot buttons are over here and over here. Depending of course on which aircraft you are, they could be on different positions. So I'm pressing the AP button and then you directly see that the AP one is now set, as we can see. You can see that the roll is there, you can see that the pit is there. So if I press the Alt button now, it simply levels my aircraft off, say up to 2290. That was the altitude I was flying, and then simply levels off. You can directly see that the speed is increasing, so keep that in mind. Before you can use the heading mode, you need to set the heading. And the heading mode currently points to this small blue marker, right? Let me zoom in a little bit further, then you can see it clearly. So you might want to change it, because if I would press it now, it would fly in the opposite direction. I can either do two things, that's click it and then right click it, that will set it to the current heading, or I can use that small mouse cursor and then change it. Once I'm happy with it, then I press the heading mode and it will start moving around. This is how easy it is, and this is how you can use it and avoid that you're crashing into the ground. You quickly get bored of aimless flying or just following the Magneto line, you want purposeful VFR. In the real world, VFR or visual flight rules, pilots use the two main techniques. One of them is pilotage and the other one is dead reckoning. And here's the cool part. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is the best sim in history for this, because the scenery is pretty accurate. Not 100% accurate, but pretty accurate. The first option is pilotage. This simply means using your eyes and figure out where you're flying. Instead of direct GPS flight planning, try planning one that follows a major highway, river or coastline. Because the scenery is from satellite data, the exact highway or river is in the sim. It's incredible fun and immersive way to navigate. If you look at this, right, I can see, for example, a harbor, but also a river, which I can use for navigation purposes. This is something which makes flying even more enjoyable, because you also enjoy the nice scenery which you're flying over, and you must say, right, it looks really beautiful. But there is another option, and the other option is simply in the electronic flight bag. In the electronic flight bag you can move to this icon. This icon is the navlog, and the navlog contains a stopwatch, and it contains also the waypoints which you plotted on your world map to figure out where you want to fly to, at least to keep track of it. It tells you exactly what the distance is from one beacon to the other one, but it also tells you how long it will approximately take you from point A to point B. So really something very useful, because it contains the heading, it contains the distance, as well as the time you need to fly from A to B. Then my last tip, which is a grab bag of essential tools which are really useful for you when you're playing Flight Simulator for the first time. The first one is called the pulse strap. It's critical, because there are two buttons to activate pulse. There's the active pulse, which you can activate by pressing the P. As you can see, the aircraft is kind of in pulse mode, but what's really important is that it's not really actively pulsing, because the physics, the winds and even the engine keeps running, so it keeps consuming fuel, and at one point you will, let's say, fall down to the ground. So if you want to get a drink or maybe get a bio break, then the best option to really pulse the aircraft is by pressing escape. This will bring you to this window, and using this option actively pulse the game without consuming fuel, etc. So super important for you to know. Now the other one is also really important, and that's very useful also, because it's called the drone camera. The drone camera is the tool to make screenshots, and you can activate it by multiple ways. I'm gonna show you the most easiest way, but I'm first gonna pause the aircraft to avoid that it's going left or right. The easiest way is to go to the toolbar and then pressing that camera option over here, which gives you this view, and there you will find the showcase. The showcase is really the drone camera mode. As you can see, you can change multiple things like the speed, the rotation speed, etc. And you will see why in a few seconds. The drone can be controlled by pressing the letters Whiskey, Alpha, Sierra and Delta. But besides that, you can also use your numeric pad, the 4, the 6, the 8 and the 2, and the plus and the minus on the numeric pad if you have activated that to change some views. In addition to that, you can still use the arrows on your keyboard to move around, like for example tilting the camera a bit, and then based on this you can make really beautiful screenshots like this one. Really dark clouds, yes, the lighter clouds, and a beautiful background, the city of Rotterdam. And finally, the real flight school The in-game training is inadequate, so you must turn to the community. There are several people besides myself which are recording and posting videos about how to learn to fly. I want to call out a few ones which I also used during my experience or during my flight learning. And one of them is Jonathan Beckett, the other one is the Flight Sim School, and of course we've got my friends from Hudson. They've got guides for a lot of aircrafts, including the Deadzones, but also including flight planning and procedures, are absolute masterclasses and will teach you everything the game doesn't. If you found this guide helpful, then hit the like button and let me know in the comments what your #1 tip is for new players. Welcome to the skies, Captain.